Cassandra asked me to do a little short presentation on the Santiago Mill, and I want to start off by saying, first of all, you should, if you haven't already gotten one, get one of the brochures. But the Santiago Mill is a gold and silver flotation mill, and probably is the finest example of a Depression era flotation gold and silver mill anywhere in the United States. Beth, is that fairly accurate? And it's less than, as the crow flies, maybe 7 miles from here. As the Jeep or the four-wheel drive vehicle goes, it's closer to maybe 9 miles from here, 10 miles maybe. But in any event, a group of us that are volunteers, unpaid volunteers, have come together under the title of the Georgetown or the Santiago Mill Stewards, and we kind of act as campground hosts to welcome visitors to the Santiago. And you go up there about 5.5 miles, and you come to the old town site of Waldorf. There was a mine, a milling operation. It was actually a town back in the early 1900s. It was the world's highest post office at one point. At Waldorf, you're about 11,400 or 500 feet. And if you turn to the west, when you get to Waldorf, you go up to the top of Argentine Peak, or many years ago, even before I started driving, you could go Argentine Pass, and it drops down into the Keystone Ski Area. If you're familiar, it would come out on near the Keystone Ski Area on the western side. That's to the west. Almost immediately above Waldorf, more to the north, is the Santiago. And what you do at Waldorf is make a switchback, go right under an old Quonset hut. It's about a 180-degree switchback. Follow 248.1, about another 1.25 miles to 1.5 miles, and you get up there, and there's the Santiago Mill. And that's what you see in these pictures. There's one of the collages that Don did that has exterior views of the Santiago. Another one shows the equipment that's inside the Santiago, and basically everything is still there. All the equipment except for the electric motors that were used to actually run it. There's this collage over here shows some of the wildlife, wildflowers, and just mountain scenery that we see up there. We almost always see mountain goats. They're the white ones, not the mountain sheep that we see down here across from the lake. But mountain goats. We see moose up there regularly. As you're driving up Leavenworth Creek, you'll say to yourself, this is moosey looking country. It's big willows, Leavenworth Creek, little beaver ponds. It is truly moose country down there. See some mountain bluebirds occasionally. We see a lot of deer, occasionally some elk, lots of marmots, the little whistle pigs that are, about 1.5 feet long and get fatter and fatter. Now each one of them almost needs their own zip code. They're so fat because they're going to go into hibernation here in a little while. And understand that Waldorf is about 11,500 feet. The Santiago is over 12,000, and about 12,200 feet elevation. So we're above timberline. See lots of chipmunks and that sort of thing. The other thing, the other collage that Don put together is actually a schematic of the mill taken from the side. It was a 4-level mill, and it talks about the different pieces of equipment that are inside the mill and what they do, what the function of each of those pieces of equipment is. So feel free to take a look at those pictures as we're wandering around. The purpose of a gold or silver mill basically is, there used to be an old country song about turning big rocks into little ones on the chain gang. That's what a mill does. It turns big rocks into little ones into dust. And from that dust, you get the gold or silver or whatever it is that you're hopefully going to find there. But it's not like placer mining where you look in the creek bed for nuggets and pull up a nugget that's big as your thumbnail and say, whoa, now I'm a rich person. Rather, you crush the rocks and turn them into dust and wash away the lighter stuff and keep the heavier stuff, which is generally gold or silver and lead. But that's the purpose of a mill. There are basically two types of mills. There's a stamp mill. The Argo down in Idaho Springs is a fine example of a stamp mill, where it just had pistons going up and down, beating the rocks into dust. The Santiago, similarly, we've got a jaw crusher. You bring on a tram, you bring the rocks or the ore out of the mine shaft out onto the jaw crusher and the grizz. The finer pieces fall through the grizz. The grizz is just basically a rib thing, kind of like a picket fence, where the smaller rocks will fall through. The bigger rocks go into the jaw crusher. They get turned into smaller rocks. They gravity fall down into a conveyor belt, runs down into a ball mill, which is like a big cement mixer full of steel marbles, for lack of a better term, and it's constantly going, and the action of those rocks and the steel marbles in there further pulverizes the rocks, and it goes then into a classifier, which if the ball mill kicks out a piece that's too big, the classifier will bring it back, dump it back into the ball mill. The smaller pieces will go into the flotation tanks, which are filled with cyanide in most cases, that leach onto the gold dust. At that point, it's churned some more and then scooped off, kind of like you'd clean a swimming pool with a net and so forth, and then it goes down to what's called a Wilfley table, that is a shaker table. And it's higher at one end, lower at one end, it's got little ribs in it, and it just constantly vibrates like that, and of course there's water running through it, and the gold dust, silver dust will settle. Hopefully the tailings or the dirt, the rock dust, will go on out and be on the tailings pile. So in a very general kind of 30,000 foot view, that's kind of how a flotation mill works. The flotation tanks is what gives it the name, as opposed to the stamp mill where the stamps are going. And I'm looking to Beth to see did I do okay? Beth is really the expert. But in any event, as you look at these different pictures, you can kind of see what I've described to you on how it works. You take big rocks, meaning the size of a basketball maybe, bring them in, crush them, roll them, turn them into powder, into dust, float them with the cyanide, wash them out again. But use cyanide and arsenic at several stages in the mill process. So consequently, the tailings dump always is very toxic. That's why if you look around on any of these old mine dumps up here, these yellow tailings piles, there's not a dandelion or a weed or anything growing. That's because that is extremely toxic. So don't go out there in your flip-flops. Don't take your dog out there, and don't let your kids pick up the rocks and start licking them or whatever, because they are toxic. The last couple of years, we've worked with the Forest Service, and they have now cleaned up the tailings dump at the Santiago. They took about 18 inches off the top of the dump. I don't remember how many 100 tons of tailings they took off, and then they put clean dirt on top of it, buried the tailings. You drive right by the big hole that they dug, and where they buried the tailings underground so that it's not dangerous anymore. Also, they went into the mill. There were a number of hot spots inside the mill where there was mercury, arsenic, zinc, cyanide, all kinds of what we called hot spots, where if you'd stand there for 2 hours, you didn't need to pay your electric bill because you glowed in the dark. It's that toxic, and they've cleaned all that up inside, so now it's safe. The mill itself is structurally very sound. The mill stewards have worked with the Forest Service, as they say, to restore and preserve the mill.